Mark Reynolds had never imagined that the silence of his home could feel so suffocating. Just a week ago, his wife, Claire, had walked out, leaving behind only a short note that she needed time to find herself. The empty rooms seemed to echo with memories of laughter and ordinary moments that suddenly felt impossible to relive. He tried to keep himself busy, throwing himself into work at his marketing agency and spending evenings scrolling through old photos, but nothing filled the void. The house, once warm and comforting, now felt heavy and cold, like a space frozen in the moment she left. One rainy evening, while nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and staring blankly at the window, the doorbell rang. Mark opened the door to find Claire's mother, Margaret, standing there, soaked from the rain, with kind, concerned eyes and a gentle presence he hadn't expected. She spoke softly, apologizing for arriving unannounced but explaining that she had come to check on him, sensing his loneliness. Surprised and unsure, Mark invited her inside, and as they sat together in the dim light of the living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows, a quiet comfort settled between them. They spoke little at first, sharing memories of Claire and fragments of the past, yet the unspoken understanding between them was strong, as if both recognized that their lives had changed in ways neither could fully explain. Margaret's presence was reassuring, almost like a lifeline, and though Mark tried to focus on the day-to-day tasks of his life, he couldn't ignore the subtle shift in his emotions, the warmth, the attention, the simple human connection that had been missing since Claire's departure. That evening, the air was thick with questions left unasked and feelings left unspoken, yet beneath the tension was a gentle hint of something new beginning, a fragile bridge forming between them that neither had anticipated. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, as both Mark and Margaret navigated the uncertain, tender space between grief and comfort, loneliness and companionship. By the time Margaret left, the air felt different, lighter yet charged, and Mark realized, almost reluctantly, that her visit was not just about concern for him, it carried a weight that hinted at changes yet to come, stirring emotions he wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore either, leaving him staring at the closed door long after she had gone, caught between past heartbreak and the unexpected possibility of new connection. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret's visits became a quiet rhythm. In Mark's otherwise lonely life, each arrival carrying a warmth that made the empty house feel alive again. She would drop by with small gestures, a homemade meal, a casual fix for a leaking faucet, or a gentle suggestion for organizing the messy garage, and each act, though ordinary, built a subtle closeness that Mark had not expected. At first, their conversations were cautious, centered around Claire and her childhood memories, stories filled with laughter and mischief that made the past feel both sweet and painful. Yet over time, the talks deepened, touching on their fears, regrets, and the quiet loneliness that had settled in their hearts since Claire's departure. Mark found himself sharing thoughts he hadn't voiced to anyone, and Margaret listened with a patience and understanding that was comforting yet unsettling in its intensity. He began to notice the way her eyes held empathy, the softness in her voice that could soothe anxieties he didn't even know he carried. One evening, as they sat together in the living room sipping tea, Margaret shared a story about Claire's habit of waking early to enjoy summer mornings with coffee and rain, a simple pleasure that revealed so much about her personality. Mark smiled faintly, feeling a pang of longing for Claire, but also a growing admiration for Margaret, who had been quietly present in his life when he needed support most. Their shared laughter over trivial memories slowly dissolved into meaningful silences, moments charged with an unspoken understanding that neither could ignore. Mark struggled with a mix of guilt and fascination. Margaret was his wife's mother, yet her presence felt like a lifeline, a connection he had been craving for months. As days passed, small touches became more noticeable, a hand brushing his on the doorway, a gentle pat on the shoulder, the comforting proximity when they sat together watching the rain. Each gesture, innocent yet intimate, made Mark aware of emotions he wasn't ready to define, feelings that danced between affection, admiration, and something deeper he couldn't yet name. Their bond grew naturally, not rushed, yet undeniably strong, as they shared both grief and quiet joys, learning to lean on each other while navigating the absence Claire had left behind. One evening, as Margaret rose to leave, her hand lingered just a moment longer on his, a fleeting contact that sent a wave of confusion and warmth through him, leaving him restless and contemplative long after she had gone. The house no longer felt completely empty, it hummed with a subtle energy, a fragile hope that life could move forward even in the wake of heartbreak. Mark realized that the connection forming between them was not a replacement for what he had lost with Claire, but something entirely new, an unexpected chance at companionship and emotional intimacy that neither of them could have predicted. That night, as he sat alone, memories of Claire mixed with thoughts of Margaret, creating a whirlwind of longing, guilt, and anticipation. He couldn't deny the comfort she brought, the way her presence made him feel seen, understood, and alive again, yet he also knew that this growing closeness carried consequences he would have to face, feelings he couldn't ignore, and choices he wasn't ready to make. The quiet of the house now felt different, charged, expectant, a space where grief and hope coexisted, and where the heart could begin to heal in ways both tender and complicated. Every visit, every conversation, every subtle touch was a step forward into uncharted emotional territory, and Mark understood that his life, once frozen in the emptiness of Claire's absence, was beginning to shift in ways that would change everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the unexpected paths of the heart. One summer evening, a storm rolled in with sudden intensity, dark clouds sweeping across the sky and rain pounding relentlessly against the windows. Mark was at home, restless and unsettled, when a soft knock echoed through the house. To his surprise, it was Margaret, soaked but smiling, her hair damp against her face, eyes bright with concern and something else he couldn't quite name. She admitted she couldn't sleep, and without hesitation, Mark invited her inside, offering a towel and a warm cup of tea. They sat together on the porch, watching the rain fall in sheets, the world outside reduced to the rhythm of the storm, and for the first time, their conversations turned completely honest. Margaret confessed that she had worried about him more than she should, revealing a vulnerability that mirrored his own hidden fears and loneliness. Mark, in turn, spoke openly about the emptiness he had felt since Claire left, the nights spent staring at empty rooms, and the weight of longing that seemed to follow him everywhere. As they talked, the emotional walls that had both guarded them for so long began to crumble, leaving a tender, fragile space where understanding and closeness could grow. Laughter mingled with the patter of rain as they shared small stories from their lives, memories of Claire intertwined with reflections on their own hearts, creating a bond that felt at once comforting and thrilling. Mark noticed the subtleties in her expressions, the softness in her voice, the careful attentions she gave him, and realized that the connection between them had grown far beyond casual concern or shared grief. He felt a warmth he hadn't known for months, a sense of being seen, understood, and valued in ways he had forgotten were possible, and he knew Margaret felt it too, even if neither dared to name it. The rain drenched them, yet they did not move to shelter, as if staying in that stormy space allowed them to feel alive in the midst of confusion and longing. Time seemed suspended, and Mark became acutely aware of the electric tension in simple touches, fleeting glances, and shared silences that spoke louder than any words could. They spoke of hope, of moving forward, and of the human need for companionship, discovering a shared courage to embrace vulnerability despite the uncertainty of their feelings. Mark understood that life was no longer about waiting for Claire's return, but about this present moment, this unexpected intimacy that had emerged naturally, gently, without force or expectation. He realized that grief had given way to something entirely new, a quiet attraction, a sense of belonging, and an emotional connection that neither he nor Margaret had anticipated. When the storm subsided and Margaret rose to leave, the brief brush of her hand on his arm lingered in his mind, igniting thoughts that made him restless and contemplative, a mix of longing and excitement for what might come next. That night, Mark reflected on the storm, the conversation, and the subtle shift that had taken place in both their hearts. He knew that their bond was no longer just about support and shared memories, it had become something deeper, fragile yet undeniable, a quiet force pulling them together in ways that felt both thrilling and comforting. The house, once heavy with absence, now held a tension and a possibility, a sense that the heart could heal and open in unexpected ways, and that love, in its gentlest form, could appear when least expected. Mark drifted to sleep that night with the echo of her voice, the warmth of her presence, and the undeniable awareness that life was no longer the same, that the path ahead was uncertain yet full of promise, and that Margaret's arrival in his life had awakened feelings he could neither ignore nor fully understand, leaving him suspended between the past he had lost and the future that was slowly beginning to unfold before him. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm, yet the air still carried the echoes of Claire's absence and the subtle tension between what had been and what was beginning to grow between Mark and Margaret. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door, and Mark opened it to find Claire standing there, calm but determined, seeking answers for herself rather than reconciliation. They talked quietly in the living room, the conversation honest but measured, as Mark explained how her departure had changed him, how he had learned to face his own emotions, and how he had begun to find strength and comfort in ways he had not anticipated. Claire listened, her face a mixture of understanding and lingering sadness, realizing that the chapter they had shared was closing and that life had moved forward even without her presence. After she left, Margaret quietly entered the room, her eyes soft and full of unspoken understanding, sensing the weight of the moment without needing words. For the first time in months, Mark felt a sense of clarity and peace. The tension that had occupied his heart since Claire's departure began to ease, replaced by a gentle warmth he hadn't realized he had been longing for. Margaret spoke softly, suggesting that he didn't need to face life alone, that the bond they had formed over shared grief, quiet conversations, and tender moments was something rare and valuable, a connection born from honesty, understanding, and mutual respect. As they talked late into the evening, laughter mingling with quiet reflection, Mark felt a slow, steady awakening of emotions, hope, affection, and a deep sense of companionship that was both comforting and exhilarating. They shared memories, not only of Claire but of their own experiences, finding joy in simple conversations, shared silences, and the subtle intimacy of being present for one another. There was no rush, no pressure, only the recognition that the connection between them had grown naturally, a gentle, unspoken understanding that life could offer second chances in unexpected forms. Mark realized that he had been waiting for love, but not in the form he had imagined. He had been waiting for a companion who could understand him, support him, and quietly fill the spaces left empty by heartbreak. Margaret's presence had become that light, guiding him forward with patience, empathy, and warmth, and as the night deepened, he understood that the path ahead was no longer about clinging to the past but embracing a future filled with possibility, tenderness, and a slow, steady romance that promised healing without haste. In that quiet evening, with the soft glow of lamps casting gentle shadows, Mark felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey, for the way life had shifted, and for the gentle, steady love that had begun to bloom between them. He knew nothing would ever be the same again, yet for the first time in months, the thought of tomorrow felt hopeful instead of frightening, and as they shared a moment of quiet companionship, he realized that love could arrive in the most unexpected ways, carrying with it the promise of joy, trust, and a renewed heart ready to embrace life fully. By the time the night ended, Mark felt a gentle certainty that his life had entered a new chapter, one of connection, warmth, and slowly unfolding romance, where heartbreak had led to healing, and companionship had transformed into the possibility of a love that was steady, tender, and entirely his own, leaving him with a sense of hope, gratitude, and anticipation for all the moments yet to come.